instead of the Legos that are supposed to be there.
Right. So then you can end up with a leaky valve, a heart murmur. You know, if we're talking about the heart, you can end up with, you know, VFib. You could end up with a lot of different things where the heart has just gone wrong because it has redeveloped itself in a funky way. Or if the messages can't get through to be redeveloped, right, assessed and redeveloped, then what happens is that the heart just degenerates until it no longer works, right, and that the tissues are super old. And then you can get, you know, things like, you know, enlarged heart, you know, just tons of different things that can go completely wrong. So, you know, diet plays into a huge amount of what's going on, and having a clean diet is super important and super essential. Okay, let's go to the last part of labeling, which is probably, for me, I mean, this part is the most sinister to me.
All
Why? I
right.
don't know. I mean, it should be. Anyway, okay, so when labels first started coming out, we could say, you know, we're going to say like labels really started hitting the market right when we started getting frozen dinners and things like that, you know, and you could buy, you know, commercial products, you know, like frozen orange juice first started coming out. And so they started to have labels for this stuff to come out. So the way things are posed now is that the labels are based on the age of the product. So say for example, you you buy an orange orchard or you grow an orange orchard, um, and it's commercial. It's a commercial farm, not an organic farm. It's a commercial farm. You can, depending on if you're going to do a concentrate, which means like on the label it could say from concentrate on it, right? So it could be a gallon of orange juice from concentrate, or you buy the frozen one, which is concentrate, and you add water to it, you know, however else. If it says it's from concentrate, then that label goes back to the 1950s when orange juice first came out. Because back then there wasn't organic or non-organic, you know, there wasn't these kind of topics or labeling categories. So you, right now in 2018, can actually legally use the original labels that have the nutrient on them. So most concentrated vitamin or orange juice says it has 100% vitamin C in it. Well, that's from the original lab testing from like the 1950s, whenever that label was originated, which means the soil was 100% different back then. And the oranges probably would have had 100% vitamin C. But now those orchards have no nutrient in them, and they spray fertilizers on them to get them to conjure fruit because there is no nutrient in the soils. But they can use the same label. So the bottom line is that label, so organic may be a little bit different. You know, when did organic labeling come out? What was the first orchard that had to have their stuff tested in the lab for organic orange juice? Maybe like the 70s. So that label may be a little bit more correct. Or we had, you know, pomegranate juice that came out into the 80s, right? And that might be a little bit closer to what may actually be in it for a nutrient. But it doesn't say were pesticides found in the lab, right? It doesn't say that, oh, here with the 100% vitamin C, because back when they were using a lot of these labels, they weren't testing for pesticide. You know, they weren't testing for radioactive material.
Oh, it's even
So
more
they weren't testing.
insidious.
It is.
I can.
So the thing is yeah, so the labeling, and then, okay, so then we're going to add on that there's a lot of things that weren't tested on this stuff that were left out in the 50s, right, for these, like, say, orange juice concentrate. So these people can reuse labels in order to, get their products on the market, because otherwise you can't really afford all the testing that's going to take place to sell your stuff on a main market to actually put a label on it. You're never going to be able to afford that. That's just not going to.
Right. So the corporations that have been in business since the 1950s that produce this stuff have grandfathered rules that allow them to bypass all the cost of any new competitor coming onto the market. That sure is a competitive advantage built into capitalism for corporations that have been around forever to play by different rules than everybody else who's not part of those corporations. And now that corporations have rules that supersede the lifetime of humans because they've been around longer than humans, we're working on corporate scale, not human scale.
But in the food labeling industry, you can use that label that had been established if you had an orchard. If you had a commercial orchard that you're putting out orange juice as a concentrate, you legally can use the 1950s label on your package because you don't have to.
And it is a huge competitive advantage. So huge that nobody else can come into the market new because they can't possibly beat your cost levels.
No, you can. What I'm saying is that you could come in as a new competitor right now if you were using concentrate orange juice as your product, and you could use that old 1950s label and not have to reestablish a nutrient label.
But they patented those labels.
If you want to go out of the box and you want to say you have a twist on your orange juice, then you're going to have to go into a whole different category and create a whole new, wheel.
Yeah, grandfathered laws are a major problem when the laws are written in ways to only grandfather certain corporations in each different field, way beyond food.
Right, but the thing is, but when it comes to labeling, you could still, if you had an orchard and you decided to do a concentrated orange juice, you could use that 1950s label that was established for some other company. So that's like a no-brainer.
Different fields have different rules depending on what's on the label. Do we get the country of origin?
The bottom line is that your product, you could use that label and just slap it on your product as long as it fell into concentrated orange juice when that label was first developed in the 1950s. But nobody would ever know, and you wouldn't ever know what was actually in your product, right? So then we get to the other part of nutritional labeling that is more sinister. So everything that is homogenized or pasteurized is cooked. And it's cooked at the level where it basically cooks the nutrient out of it. So there's no possible way that when that label says, oh yeah, this, juice from concentrate has 100% vitamin C on it, there's no possible way that's true because they had to cook it, right, to homogenize it and pasteurize it to kill, all the bacteria, microbes, and which also kills all the nutrient in the product. So the bottom line is, like, nothing on the labeling in any way, shape, or form is accurate or correct and should be avoided. Anything that has a nutritional label on, it's not even worth looking at, and it's really not even worth buying because the whole component is one giant ridiculous fraud. And there's nothing that is possibly on there that's going to help you in your search for the proper nutrition. And like we were talking about, if it's under 1%, say you're going gluten-free, right?
All right.
And you look at the product and you go, well, there's no wheat product in this product at all. So it must be no wheat, no corn, no nothing. So it must be okay because in the labeling here it says, like, it doesn't have any of that stuff in it. So I can eat it. Well, that's not true because you may actually have 1% of like wheat or spelt or salmonella or something else like that is a wheat product that's not being disclosed as a binder because they like to use a lot of the wheat stuff as binders, to bind different things together. So you don't know. And that's the other part with allergies, with food allergies. You could go to the doctor, you could have a food allergy test, and the doctor says, okay, you got to stay away from these things. And so you're looking at the labels, and you're getting stuff that's not supposed to cause inflammation in your body, because that's exactly what food allergies do, is they cause high level inflammation, which means people always want to know what inflammation is. I mean, it shows up as symptoms of foggy thinking, not enough rest, sluggishness. It can show up as headaches. It can show up as lots of different kinds of pain, physical pain, huge amounts of physical pain. We do get inflammation as we age, as our bodies, break down. But basically what it is it's when the blood, the red blood that goes to the body that supposedly has the oxygen, water, nutrient, it's when the red cell, right after it's produced from the marrow into the body, breaks down, or it's already broken down in the production phase coming out of the marrow, which means that it's not round anymore. The cell has collapsed, which means it holds no water, it holds no oxygen, and it holds no food source anymore. And then what it does is it starts to get sticky, and it starts to coagulate in the red blood stream, in the artery. And you can actually have what's called, doctors will tell you this doesn't exist, you can have a red blood cell stroke. You can have an inflammatory stroke because you're not getting any oxygen to the brain, you're not getting any water, so the blood is really thick. So that's exactly what inflammation is. So you're not getting oxygen to the brain, so you're getting sluggish, you're tired because the blood is thick in your body, and the body's no longer holding. The cells are no longer have connectors to hold any of this stuff to keep them plump and keep them moving. So that's what inflammation is when your healthy red cells collapse. They sometimes can be collapsed out of the development, which is the marrow of the bone, and can be sick from day one. And then you just get tireder and tireder and tireder until there's nothing left of you, just kind of a slow phase down. So the other thing too, I'll just say this because I'm kind of done with the other thing. Let's talk about, we have something like, I can't remember the exact amount. I want to say like 50 trillion. I mean, we have 50, trillion cells in our body that are moving and carrying all the things that we need.
Yeah, that's underestimated, but it's a big enough number that people start to get the grasp of things. We're probably well beyond that.
Yeah, so the inside the cell is the microbes, right? So because the microbes were here before anything else was ever here, right? So we are made up of, I don't know, I'm going to throw something out there, like maybe, 50 trillion microbes in every cell, right?
All right.
And so when the cell starts, like the red cell starts to collapse, this is another huge part of inflammation. When the cell collapses or it's not formed properly, in order for the red blood cell to carry all the things that it needs to carry, the microbes start to get forced out of it, or there's no place for the microbes to properly live. If the microbes are perfectly formed inside of a red cell, right, all their byproduct and everything gets cleaned up, because that's what microbes do. If you have a compost, they eat all the bad, and they keep recycling it all, munching it down, and turning it into a usable product, which can be a food source or whatever else that can be healthy for the body. And so when the microbe, off gases or has a byproduct, then that also gets cleaned up. We can call it their poo-poo. Gets re-cleaned up within that cell because it's a whole organism, And that's what they're doing, is the microbes are constantly cleaning up the cells, making sure there's nothing bad attaching onto the cells or getting inside the cell. They eat it up, whatever else, and reprocess it into energy. We'll just say it gets reprocessed into energy or nutrient or whatever else it's going to be. When the cell starts to go bad and there's no place for the microbes to live anymore, they get forced out.
So now we have migrant microbes?
Yeah, well, and the microbes are no longer taking care of the cells, making sure there's no invaders getting into them.
No, they're busy building these civilizations in other people's homes because they've been displaced from their home. It's almost like they're on Earth and we have all these migrants going to Europe and having problems there. And
right. But this is the basic component of all disease. That's what we're talking about, is inflammation. Is the bottom line of all disease. It is the bottom line of all physical pain. It is the bottom line of aging. Okay, so everything originates from the microbe not being in a good place. Okay, so once the microbe's forced out, it goes rogue. And when a microbe goes rogue and it doesn't have a job, then it can start to break down the healthy tissues and the system. So once it goes rogue, it starts to decompose the body as compost. So it actually starts to help the degeneration process and the aging process. And then all the other symptoms get worse and worse and worse because the microbe wants to break things down and make them better, but it's not in a contained area. So then what happens is the microbes poop, right, no longer is getting reassimilated, broken down within the organism of the cell that it's in, right? Now it's going everywhere. And so we call that lactic acid. So lactic acid basically starts to form in the muscle tissues, creating more pain. And it starts to cause the alkalinity of the body to go south, which means once the inflammation really starts to take hold, the microbes are starting to break down your process. They're starting to poop out into the main system, their byproduct being lactic acid. Then the body starts to go into serious inflammatory disease. And the body, the only thing, and this is the same in farming, the only thing that cools acid is calcium. So in the same thing with farming, so you have an area, like a bedding area where you have a lot of animals, and at night they poo-poo and pee-pee, and they're producing a lot of acid on that dirt. Well, when you start to take out the, straw and everything to put into a compost, to be broken down, you'll start to notice a lot of flies and bugs and all kinds of stuff because that's introducing, disease into the soil because it's so high acid. But you can throw down, powdered limestone, which is pure calcium, and other things directly onto that soil, and with minutes, all those bugs and flies are gone because it immediately cooled the acid. So the same thing happens in the body. So the body, in order for the heart, if you go 1 degree above, a little bit above alkalinity, your heart will stop. If you go a little bit below into an acid zone, more than the body can, handle, there's a perfect pH load there. If it goes a little bit below, the heart will stop. So when you're microbes and you have inflammatory disease, what's happening is that you're in such a huge acid state that your body's breaking down at a huge rate. And then if you're not getting enough biological calcium in your diet, which means you're not getting food that's rich in calcium in your diet, and it's a super easy thing. For example, when you have worms in your soil, the slime that actually comes off the worms as they're breaking down the food, that slime, which they call a casing, that's left behind as the worm goes along, it's pure calcium. So if you have worms that are in your soil and you have high density worms and you're feeding them in your soil and they're breaking it down, you're going to have a lot of natural calcium in your food, which is going to help your body, to fight the inflammation. So this is what happens when you get. This is the part that's really bad. So you get to a high level of inflammatory disease, and then there's so much lactic acid in the system. There's not enough biological calcium coming in, that the body has to leach the calcium out of the bone. So this is where you start to get, like osteopenia, osteoporosis, and then it'll leave things, or spondylitis. A lot of these terms are because the body is leaching out the calcium rapidly. So when the body goes into an emergency state, this and blood sugar. So we wonder why we can't get healthy or we can't feel good. This whole alkalinity thing is the number one big monster, or elephant in the room that doctors don't want to talk about, that is causing, like all the major problems. And so your acid states are going up. They're up all the time. You're eating foods like dairy and meat that cause high acid function. Under normal circumstances, if your microbes were contained and your body was in good shape, no problem, right? But now that the microbes are out and they're leaching lactic acid through your whole system and your system's super acidy, now you've got to think about how you're going to get your body back into alkalinity, which is like a plant-based diet, period, in the story. And hopefully you're growing enough greens and stuff and you have a lot of worms in your soil, so you're getting enough calcium. You could take, I know a lot of people who take the eggshells, from their chickens and grind them up, and put that in smoothies and stuff like that in order to try to get a biological, calcium back into their bodies if they have high levels of inflammatory disease. So once the body starts to leach the calcium out of your bones to cool, so it'll rise up. So all of a sudden you'll have heartburn, right? You ate something and now you have heartburn. Or you have a headache. That's a pretty good indication that now whatever you ate or whatever your environment or your situation was just pushed your inflammation way up over the charts, your acid way up over the charts. Now your body has to leach calcium out of your bones immediately to cool it. Now the body's not going to say, okay, body, just leach a little bit of calcium out. This is all we need. The body goes into 911 and leaches more than it needs, right? So then whatever's left will attach back onto the bone, and you'll have bone spurs and weird things like that kind of happen. And that's kind of like where some of that kind of stuff comes from. But it's going to leach calcium out of your teeth. It's going to leach calcium out of your bones, of your jaw, of your skull, all over your body in order to cool it down. And then when the bones don't have any more calcium in it, your body's going to have to go after the organs.
So
and it's going to have to leach the calcium out of the organs.
While you're talking about calcium, the calcium-magnesium balance is so important. Are there similar ways that magnesium can be tracked to how calcium is? Where do people get their magnesium from?
Green leafy plants like kale, and you would get the calcium from that too if you're growing it yourself.
Okay.
But remember, most supplements are non-biological, right? They're non-biological nutrient, which means that it isn't derived from a plant source. So most magnesium that people get is like a toxic mechanical magnesium, right? So people say, well, I started taking magnesium and I started having diarrhea. Well, it's because it's a non-biological. I started taking vitamin C, I was only taking 1,000 milligrams a day and I had diarrhea. Well, because you're taking a non-biological vitamin C. So,
yeah.
If people, the thing is like you have to go back to kind of like, in order to really feel your body physically, you really have to go back to growing food. You really have to go back to, at least it's growing 20-25%. In one small cold frame over a winter, you could grow tons of kale in there. You put enough compost in there, you got enough nutrient. I call it fast food. But you could grow, 15 stalks of kale in there, right?
Yeah,
as long as you started off with nutrient-dense compost.
I have the same kale and chard still growing as we planted 2 years ago in the same 2 boxes.
Yeah, because we put a ton of nutrient in there, remember? And we put a ton of stuff in there that the microbes could eat. And if they're eating and they're breaking it down and they have a big enough food source, the worms and the microbes, then they're going to be constantly creating new nutrient for those plants.
And
so cold frames are, yeah, and this is a kind of a cool thing. One of the coolest things that I've ever seen as far as indoor growing was when I was in New Mexico in Taos, and I got to go to I think they call them bioships now, but they used to call them motherships, and it's a community there. And the houses don't need heating or air conditioning. They don't really change much in temperature, even though they're at 8,500 feet elevation. There's a lot of snow because of the way that they're built. But in the kitchen area of almost every one of them, there's an area where there's soil that touches the soil underground. So you can grow like an herb garden right there in your kitchen, right? And then you just water it. So even in the wintertime, you can grow something. So, I mean, the other thing too is like, you could think about, if you wanted to kind of grow indoors and be attached to soil, you could grow like, a sunroom. You could build a sunroom off your house, or you could do like different kinds of things, to have different kinds of contact. Or you can have like a little grow box, in your house. Or, what might even be more interesting is if you do have plants. Bear was saying, this part didn't get on the show last Saturday, but he was talking about how because he lives, in a city or whatever else, and he's growing, his weed, and he's making different medicines from each plant. He's actually cultivating like different kinds of worm farms that he has in his house, and he feeds the worms different things in order to get the, natural chemistry right to develop the plant to grow a certain kind of medicine. So, even if you lived in an inside environment, you could get yourself, like small worm farms, and you could feed them, specific things to create certain nutrients. And then, then it usually has a valve, or there's water in the bottom. And so you pour off the liquid that's left from the worm farms. And then you use that liquid in water, purified water, to water, whatever garden window plants that you have. Like if you do have to grow kind of in an indoor setting. So, you could, there's all kinds of different ways.
So whereas they,
really
where we can make a compost tea from a viable compost, this is essentially a worm tea.
Yeah, and it's small. I think the boxes are pretty small that you can buy to put them in. There's an area that you put the food in, and then then they make soil and stuff out of it, and that's what they live in. And then below comes the liquid, and then you can pour the liquid off, and then add it to water to put onto the plants if you're going to grow indoors, so that they do have some kind of contact with microbes, right? Because worm is a microbe, right? And so then if the worms are there, then they're also helping to bring a whole bunch of other hosts of microbes in. And, I may go outside and I may pull dirt from, say I have a friend or my own garden or a garden that I'm growing somewhere else. I may pull some dirt in that I've cultivated that have tons of microbes in it and put those microbes in with the worm farm.
Right.
So that now I've got like a whole massive microbial, environment.
Yeah, you've seeded it essentially.
Be happy.
You seed the new environment with new microbes.
Yeah, so we could do, what is it called? We would call that macro farming.
Yeah, and
like more of a macro farming.
There's also mushrooms, which have a totally unique role that are totally symbiotic with the plant roots, so that they're different from the microbes, but they're part of the whole system. So by introducing proper spores and proper mushrooms, there are other characteristics. The mushrooms tend to pick up